to our fourth web dialogue organized by the Parliamentary Assembly of the OSCE. These initiatives, as many of you know already, aim to promote an interparliamentary exchange on relevant security developments pertaining to the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. Today's event will focus on the interlinkages between the environment and public health, offering a good opportunity to explore if the ongoing pandemic represents actually a turning point for environmental protection in the OSCE region. This topic is both timely and very relevant for the future of all our citizens. Please also join me in welcoming our three high-level expert speakers, Dr. Francesca Dominici, connected from Harvard, Mr. Tao Tsang, connected from Washington, D.C., and Mrs. Susan Gardner, connected from Nairobi. And we will talk more in details with them in just a bit. Thank you very much for your readiness to contribute to this online policy debate with your valuable insights. Now, allow me just a few technical announcements before we begin. Please note that this web dialogue is being recorded and broadcasted live on the OSCPA's Facebook webpage and our website. As for previous web dialogues, French, English, Russian interpretation will be provided during the event. Please note that listening to the interpretation requires a separate device. All of you should have received information on how to connect to the Interprefy service. If not, please let us know in the WebEx chat function visible on the right side of your screen, and our team will offer necessary support. Please be informed that the token for today's event is OSCPA, all in capital letters, webinar. W capital letter, webinar, small letters. To facilitate the work of our interpreters, please try to speak clearly and slowly, and feel free to share in advance any written remarks. Kindly note that all requests to take the floor must be written in the web dialogues chat, possibly specifying also the language of your intervention, which will be followed and noted down by our staff. To ensure a smooth experience, I ask all participants to kindly mute their microphones when not speaking. Please bear also in mind that you should unmute your microphone only when given the floor. Finally, I would encourage all speakers during the debate to limit their intervention to maximum 3 minutes, thereby enabling a greater participation and timely conclusion of the event by 1700, which is also the end of our interpretation service. So today's program looks as follows. I will give in a moment the floor to Ms. Doris Barnett, the chair of the OSCPA Committee on Economic Affairs, Science, Technology and Environment, who will deliver some opening remarks. Before doing that, I think she will pass the floor to our president, Mr. Zeratelli, and to Roberto Montella, Secretary General, for some greeting words. After Mrs. Barnett remarks, we will give the floor to our three guest speakers for their expert remarks. And subsequently, we will open the debate, which will be followed by, again, some short remarks from our speakers and concluding words from our rapporteur. Everything should be ending at 1700. So without further ado, I will now give the floor immediately to the chair of our Committee on Economic Affairs, Science, Technology and Environment, Ms. Doris Barnett from Germany. Who, by the way, Doris, happy birthday.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. And I'm very happy that you all could join this meeting. And I'm happy that we have 105 or even more people who signed in, but I don't know how many will participate. After our three guest speakers, I have another guest whom I invited. This is a German parliamentarian, Klaus Mintrup, and he's a specialist because he's a biologist and he attends the UNEP meetings in New York quite often. So he's very, he knows very much about what we are talking now. So thank you very much for you to join us. But now let's have the floor. Let's give the floor to our president and our secretary general for their short welcome remarks. Thank you.
Thank you. Dear Doris, first of all, happy birthday to you, and great to have this birthday webinar. So this combination is very pleasant, and I wish you all the best, good health, and of course to all our participants tuned here today. And we're all experiencing these challenging times, but we have hope that very soon it will end. So once again, I'd like to all our members especially those who are joining us first time. As Marco already informed you, it's a 4-hour webinar, and specifically on environmental issues. And I think this project of our web dialogues during this pandemic is quite successful. A lot of attention and participants and good discussions. I think that will be the case today. So our discussion is already we are informed by Marco Bonabello will focus on environmental protection in terms of COVID. And in recent weeks, of course, we're sure that many of you have seen footage of wildlife venturing into cities and reports better air quality because of economic shutdowns and lesser traffic. This is a direct reminder of our impact on the environment. Prior to this crisis, environmental protection had been a top priority, of course, for many of our citizens. Just last year, you remember that Greta Thunberg was named Time Magazine's Person of the Year for her activism to stop climate change. And just 6 months ago, the world leaders met at the UN Climate Change Conference, where Secretary General Guterres pointed out the urgent need to do much more to address the climate change. But in times of crisis, unfortunately, we often see that the environment takes a backstep of economic recovery. In most cases, we see an urge to restart the economy once the sanitary situation is under control. And of course, during our discussions, we always mention that there are opportunities during this crisis, as to paraphrase Albert Einstein's well-known phrase, in the midst of every crisis lies great opportunity. It's true. 10 years ago, we missed this opportunity to mitigate the environmental crisis, and the great shutdown can be a new chance to reinvent our model of economic growth, to seriously tackle climate change and to protect the environment. With this in mind, I hope you will find the discussion to be a good opportunity to hear from our distinguished experts who will contribute today. We're thankful for this, Dr. Dominici, Mr. Chang, and Ms. Gardner, and I'd like once again to warm and welcome them. It's also the occasion to reinforce multilateralism and international cooperation. As I have mentioned on other instances, we need a global response to all fronts to overcome this crisis. As members of the OSCE, if you are familiar with this, need to bring security in a comprehensive manner. So look forward to listening to our experiences on the ground and highlight some of the best practices from the countries and national parliaments, which could serve as example elsewhere. And before I conclude, let me thank the leadership of the Second Committee, Doris Bernet, Dr. Gerasimov, Alona Hucha, Rebea, and our staff in Copenhagen and in Vienna, especially Marco and the team. And by the way, thank you, Marco, also for providing a very interesting infographics along all those weeks, how countries in OSCE are responding to the crisis. So I wish you an interesting webinar and looking forward to hearing your great ideas. Thank you. Any technical problem?
No. Marco, do I go ahead or you give me the floor? I just go ahead. Okay, fine. Well, thank you. I go ahead. Thank you very much to all the participants to this Parliamentary Web Dialogue. We are 106 participants at the moment, 43 members of parliament from 34 delegations. This has become kind of a Friday traditional appointment. There's a Swedish 15-year-old girl that has launched the initiative Friday for Future. I like to think of this OSCE initiative probably at a lesser mediatic scale, but the Fridays for Democracy. It's becoming a little tradition. We meet every Friday and we have these discussions on the different important issues of the OSCE three-dimensional approach to security. These events, of course, are an opportunity to maintain alive the dialogue between parliamentarians, and I mentioned before we started the meeting to some of the guest speakers, which I will greet soon, that they should not be surprised by the fact that the parliamentarians are talking to each other like in a big family, because this is the occasion for them to actually meet. Our statutory meetings were cancelled this year, so it's also an opportunity for them to talk to each other. It's not a classical webinar where experts present some of their expertise to an audience and then the audience asks for questions. But here it's normally also an opportunity for members to talk and present situations of their own countries and talk to each other. But we have often heard during this period that multilateral organization like ours needs to be reinforced because the challenges we have in front of us, like fighting terrorism, or the health crisis that we have, of course, and the movement of people, climate change, are global challenges that require global answers. And of course, a platform like ours tries to attempt to give some global answers. Now, environmental protection, what we chose today, is indeed one of the most important global challenges that we have. And as UN Secretary General, also the President quoted the Secretary General of the UN, recently said at Davos meeting, and I'd like to quote him here, he said, "Climate change is the defining issue of our times. For the first time in the history of humankind, there is a limit, a physical limit to our perspective of development. And this has led humankind to declare war to nature, and nature is striking back." Now, I know when we talk about climate change, we always think, okay, this is something for the future and somehow it will sort itself out. And I am convinced, yes, the planet is not going to suffer. The planet will manage to survive the change of climate. I think what will be destroyed is us and our capacity to live on this planet. So I think it's very important to address the issue of climate change as one of the most important directions that we have in our life today, and to change course. Now, I'd like to also welcome our guest speakers. Thank you very much to Dr. Dominici, Mr. Zhang, and Ms. Gardner for participating into this seminar. And of course, we look forward to your presentations and also interaction with parliamentarians. And I also would like to thank Marco and the team in Vienna for moderating this event. Also those who are connected from Vienna, we have many OSCE participating states delegations, and the International Secretariat of the OSCE is also connected in Vienna. So I also greet them and thank them. And also we have as another special guest, I would say, as an observer, the Secretary General of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Mediterranean, Mr. Sergio Piazzi, is also with us today. So thank you very much, Sergio. And I wish us all a very good seminar, and I look forward to hearing the debate. Thank you, Marco.
Thank you, Roberto, and thank you, George, for your opening remarks. And hello again, dear colleagues. Well, when an unidentified pulmonary disease broke out, let's say sometime last year, and it hit the Chinese city of Wuhan first, few, if any, of our countries seems very concerned. Back then, no one imagined that this outbreak would grow into a world pandemic, a pandemic hitting us so hard in our lives. During our previous parliamentary web dialogues, we have delved into and exchanged views about the economic security fallout of the pandemic, its impact on human rights and democratic control, as well as on conflicts in the OSCE region. Taking into account that the pandemic is having such a dramatic consequences on citizens around the world, it is our duty to seize this moment as an opportunity to pause and reflect, to rethink our old habits, and to ponder how we should move on. It is evident that we will not be able to return to our lives before the pandemic. There's no way back. In my opinion, our very own development model, for instance, globalization, should be tweaked and made a more sustainable, fair, solidary, and safe. We also need more consideration for national self-sufficiency, especially in the healthcare section, what we saw about masks. For instance, we might consider transferring back home the production of certain key medical assets for reason of public safety, as some countries in Europe really starting to do. This without losing sight, of course, of the immense benefits of international trade and fair economic relations, but price-related considerations cannot be the only guiding principle in this context. As a matter of fact, a key topic of the COVID-19 pandemic has brought back to our agenda is precisely the focus of today's webinar, the profound link between the environment in which we live and our health, and consequently, the urgent need to adapt our development attitudes accordingly. And actually, to me, it came to my mind, air pollution leads to higher temperature. Higher temperature leads to dry landscapes, leads to loss of water, leads to less harvest, leads to, especially in Africa and South America, leads people move into the cities, leads to overpopulated cities, leads to even higher air pollution there, and worsens the sanitary conditions and so forth. And therefore, it triggers actually what we all don't want. Recent studies hint to a positive correlation between the exposure to significant levels of air pollution and higher fatality rates. Dr. Domenici, one of our guest speakers today, will share her insights in this regard. As you may know, the notion of protecting the planet's health to preserve our own is not new. We have addressed this topic in our assembly, as the president already mentioned, in Ottawa and Stockholm, so 25 years ago, and it still is all right. Hence, when discussing about the recovery of our economies and societies after the pandemic, it's crucial that we keep environmental protection at the very core of our strategy. As you already said, Roberto, Friday for Future is not just a nice effort a young woman did. We need to listen and to act, finally. As Mrs. Kristalina Georgieva, Managing Director of the International Monetary Fund, expressed during the Petersburg Climate Dialogue number 11, if the recovery is to be sustainable, if our world is to become more resilient, we must do everything in our power to promote a green recovery. This pandemic can be the turning point, and it should be the turning point. We are welcoming today Mr. Tao Zhang, Deputy Managing Director of the IMF, who will speak to possible green responses to the pandemic. But last but not least, welcome Mrs. Susan Gardner, Director of the Ecosystem Division of the UNEP, who will delve into how the current crisis should serve as a momentum for action and green policy making. She should know, of course, my colleague Klaus Mintrop quite well, since he's the expert and visiting the UNEP conferences regularly. In this context, I would be very interested to hear whether measures with an emphasis on environmental protection have already been discussed or put in place in our countries and national parliaments. I know that we do quite a bit in the European Parliament, and it can be one of the main positions in the time that Germany has the chair. In addition, what could be the long-term adjustments required to prevent similar crises in the future? There is much to discuss, dear colleagues, and I now look forward to hearing first from our expert speakers, and then follow from you, from Mr. Mentrop at first, and then from all of you who already has raised their hands. Thank you very much for listening, and I'm now interested in listening to you.
you very, very much, Madam Chair. I will now, dear colleagues, I'm pleased to introduce now our three guest speakers whose contribution to our debate will be invaluable. So the first speaker, as it was already mentioned, is Dr. Francesca Dominici, Director of the Harvard Data Science Initiative and Professor of Biostatistics, Population and Data Science at the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health. She's an elected member also of the National Academy of Medicine and of the International Society of Mathematical Statistics. Dr. Dominici is a data scientist whose pioneering scientific contribution have advanced public health research around the globe. Dominici has provided the scientific community and policymakers with robust evidence on the adverse health effects of air pollution, noise pollution, and climate change. Recently, she also authored a study on long-term exposure to air pollution and COVID-19 mortality rates in the United States. Dr. Dominici, I look forward to hearing your insights on the impact of pollution on citizens' health, including in the specific context of COVID-19 pandemic. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Marco. I will share my slide. Can you see it? Okay.
Yes, we can.
Great, thank you. First of all, thank you so much for inviting me. I am honored and delighted to address you all. I will take 5 to 7 minutes to tell you the most recent research on historical exposure to air pollution and COVID-19 mortality in the United States. I think I don't need to explain to you how COVID-19 is now an unmatched public health emergency. And we feel it was really important to start looking at data to figure out whether or not exposure to air pollution can exacerbate the severity of this horrible virus. We are learning all together that COVID-19 caused a viral pneumonia and also what is called acute respiratory distress syndrome, which has a very high mortality rate. COVID-19 can cause severe inflammation of the heart and the circulatory system. And the majority of deaths, although things are fluid and evolving, seems to occurring among people older than 65. And clearly many comorbidity, hypertension, diabetes, cardiovascular disease can exacerbate the severity of COVID-19. Now, let me tell you in a minute, what's fine particulate matter. Fine particulate matter are very, very small particles. These are air droplets. Their size is 100 of the diameter of a human hair. These are really, really tiny. They penetrate deep into your lungs. So they can get into your bloodstream. And they are caused by power plants, motor vehicle, airplanes, residential wood burning, forest fire, anything really that is related to combustion of fossil fuel. We know a lot about health effects of fine particulate matter. There have been thousands of studies all around the world that are documenting extensively the adverse effect of fine particulate matter on our lungs, on our heart, and now there are also effects on our brain. So why investigating the relationship between fine particulate matter and COVID-19? Well, I think that as we were learning more and more, I think it's pretty clear that there is a very large overlap between the cause of deaths for COVID-19 and the diseases that are affected by fine particulate matter. And so we hypothesized that the long-term exposure to fine particulate matter could averse the respiratory cardiovascular system and therefore could exacerbate the severity of the outcome after you have contracted the COVID-19 virus. We very briefly have been spending, my entire team have been spending years studying the health effects of air pollution. We have gathered the largest data in the world. We are talking about 550 million records. And 3 years ago, we have documented a strong link between air pollution and all-cause mortality, even below the national ambient air quality standards. So these are massive amount of data that we have been gathered to look at these issues. And by the way, I'm going to go very quickly on this slide that I'll be more than happy to share with anyone who is interested. What we found in our previous studies was that long-term exposure to fine particulate matter increased the mortality risk for all-cause mortality by 7%. And what's really worrisome is that racial minority, Black people, Asian, Hispanic, and people of lower socioeconomic status have a mortality risk for fine particulate matter that is much larger than the general national average. In the United States, we are facing also this huge issue of environmental justice, where Afro-American tends to breathe pollution levels that are higher than the white. These are the levels, this picture shows the levels of fine particulate matter in the United States that fortunately have been declining over time. However, as you can see, the red line is telling you that Afro-Americans tend to always breathe pollution level higher than everybody else. So turning to COVID-19, because we were building a big data platform to look at the issues, as the pandemic was exploding, we quickly gathered data. This slide shows on your left the average of exposure to fine particulate matter in the United States in the last 15 years. And the map on the right shows the county-specific mortality rate for COVID-19. Our latest analysis include data up to April 22nd. These are results I'm showing you, but we are conducting analysis daily in making sure that the results are consistent. So we explore the relationship between as whether long-term exposure to fine particulate matter is increasing the mortality rate for COVID-19. Data in the United States, I'm really thankful and grateful from Johns Hopkins. They have been gathering daily counts of mortality for COVID-19 for all the counties in the United States. These are data that are verified by the Center of Disease Control, and that's where we'll be able to get our information. When you are looking at the relationship between fine particulate matter and COVID-19 mortality rate, it's really important that you're not only looking at correlation, but you actually develop sophisticated statistical models that can account for what we call potential confounding factors. So we need to be able, to the degree possible, to disentangle the effect of fine particulate matter from other variables, like, for example, the percentage of people that smoke, the population density, the number of ICU beds. So we gather over 20 variables to try to make sure that the degree as possible we could isolate the effect of fine particulate matter on COVID-19 mortality rate from other potential variables. What this feature shows is that even though these are preliminary results, we found that only 1 unit increase in long-term exposure to fine particulate matter increased the mortality rate for COVID-19 by 8%. One way to think about these results is that if you take 2 geographical areas, they are as similar as possible to each other with respect to population density, percentage of people smoking, percentage of people in poverty, anything you can think about. And the only difference between these 2 counties is that one has had a higher level of historical exposure of PM than others. The one more polluted will have a higher mortality rate for COVID by 8%. What this picture shows on the bottom is that these are our estimates. They are centered at 8% under very different statistical models. So we run the analysis, for example, excluding the area of New York, and then we want to adjust for Facebook data using COVID-19 symptoms. We accounted from when the epidemic started. So we really try to the degree as possible, as I said, to make sure the results were not too sensitive to statistical assumptions. I'll skip this. I think this research has been having an enormous coverage all around the world. It started with an article in the New York Times on April 7. I think it's now particularly controversial issues in the United States, especially under EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency under Trump, as at the same time in the United States, there is an attempt to roll back environmental regulation. So I think this is actually later today I will be addressing the House Committee of Science and Policy and Technology, as there is really a highly controversial issue so far. I also want to mention that this was a really very interesting article on The Guardian on May 4 that not only mentioned our study, but it's mentioning the, I would say, an entire body of evidence also from my colleagues in Italy, in the UK, in the Netherlands, in China. And there are many, many studies that are emerging. They're showing a relationship between exposure to fine particulate matter and increased severity for COVID-19. To conclude, I think that the strengths of the study, this is the first nationwide US studies on COVID-19 and air pollution. I also want to mention that all the data are publicly available, so it's a fully reproducible. We found the results are sensitive to sensitivity, are robust to sensitivity analysis. But this study has also limitation. I mean, these studies, as all of the studies during a pandemic, are limited by the fact that, unfortunately, COVID-19 data is only available at aggregated level. So we don't have access to individual level records yet. I hope that will become available. And so clearly it's an observational study. So for as much as we can be sophisticated on our modeling, we also have to make sure that there are no confounding factors. So I think in terms, I want to conclude what are the public health implications. I think it's really important in this middle of the pandemic, but even after, as it seems that this virus will be with us for some time. I think we really have to give a close look to the counties and geographical areas that historically have been highly exposed to pollution. I cannot stress enough the importance of continued regulation of fine particulate matter. And clearly, people of color and poor people tends to be much more affected. This is a slide where I want to show my team, and actually it's quite of an international team. This project was actually led by a graduate student, Zhao Hu, who is from China, Rachel Nethery, professor at the School of Public Health, Danielle Brown from Israel, also at the School of Public Health, and Ben Sabat, a data scientist in my team. Here, there is a website where you can get all of the additional information. And that's all I have to say, and thank you very much for the opportunity.
Well, thank you. That was more than interesting. Thank you very much. And now our next speaker on our list is Mr. Tao Zhang from the IMF. Please, Mr. Zhang, you have the floor.
Thank you, Doris, and happy birthday to you as well. Good morning and good afternoon and good evening, and depending on where you are. And I'm so glad to join this parliamentary assemblies for this immensely important and timely discussions on the COVID-19 and climate change crisis. Of course, the first crisis, the COVID-19, is acute and immediate. And the second, slower burning, but equally maybe more critical in the long terms, which is the climate change. I absolutely agree with the remarks made by the previous speakers, Francisca, on this the relationship between the COVID-19 and the environmental pollutions, and I find this COVID-19 pandemic and the climate change, the flu crisis, are clearly interlinked. And because the scale and the nature of the economic policies decisions being made now will, crucially affect climate change and climate outcomes far into the future. So my remarks today will focus on the green recovery, as you mentioned early on. The pandemic, of course, today adds the urgencies to address these issues. And climate certainly is not on the back burner. So let me start with the COVID-19 pandemic. As we know, policymakers across the globe are rightly focused on the protecting public health, stabilizing economies, and helping those whose livelihoods are at stake first. That's rightly so. But if we want the recovery from the crisis is to be sustainable, and if our world is to become more resilient, and then we must do everything we can in our power to promote a green recovery, as our managing directors, Kristalina Georgieva, said recently, as you quote a moment ago, Doris. Recently, the IMF put out a short note, but it's an important note, with suggestions for ways in which our member countries can do in terms of the greening the recovery. So I would like to take these opportunities to highlight some of these key priorities. First, we need to develop a new, ambitious, medium-term climate plan for the UN Climate Change Conference next year's, the COP26. In this regard, the European Union is in the vanguard here by setting ambitious targets in their Green Deal, which is announced at the end of last year. And I noticed there's a very positive progress since the announcement in that regard. Second, use public support wisely. I can give you a few examples. For example, the green investment could be prioritized. In fact, according to our estimate, the transitions to a low carbon world requires $2.3 trillion in clean energy investment each year. And the financial lifelines to carbon intensive companies could be conditional on commitment to reduce carbon emissions. So these are just two of the many examples. Third, we have to put the right price on carbon emissions. Why? Because this would direct new investment towards low carbon technologies and contribute to now enhanced revenue needs. And existing taxes and emissions, including the trading schemes, are not strong enough to change the behaviors as we need it right now. For example, the average price we currently imposed on carbon emissions is only $2 per ton, and measures equivalent to global carbon price. What we need is actually at least $75 per ton by 2030, according to the research from the literatures. So that is the minimum requirement we need to keep the global warming under the 2 degrees Celsius. Fourth, we need to promote green finance. Here, targeted guarantees can mobilize private finance for green investment. Banks receiving public support could be mandated to better disclose climate risks in their lending and investment portfolios. And of course, we also need to find better ways of pricing in climate risks. which underscores that the climate-related disasters have so far have little effect on equity markets, etc. Fifth, we need to promote a just transitions. That means we need to assist vulnerable households, workers, regions, and trade-exposed or fuel-producing firms, and using the carbon pricing revenues in broad tax reductions or public investment that boost growth and benefit all households. And six, which the last but not least, we have to coordinate with everybody to stabilize the climate system. We need to go well beyond the Paris Accord. One way to do this, as we at the IMF proposed in our fiscal monitors published last October, is to complement the Paris commitment with a carbon price floor arrangement among major stakeholders. And one way or the other, we strongly believe that all countries need to work together to scale up global mitigations in equitable and effective manners. And here, of course, we at the IMF committed to play together with all of our members countries, including the European member countries, to achieve these objectives. As our managing directors, Kristalina Georgieva, recently pointed out, that the climate, we have put climate high on our agenda, and of course she also said that this pandemic taught us a lessons learned, that is, don't mess with Mother Nature. So we need to rapidly scale up the support to our members, of course, through our policy advice, financial resources, and global regional platform for joint actions such as today's the forum here. And of course, we are actively working with our European partners on, for example, on the analytical papers on climate policies in EU to help inform discussions with our member countries here. So let me end by emphasizing once again that this is a time to act, especially with lower oil prices. And the decisions we take now will shape economies and the global systems for decades to come. And we must work together to set a higher bar that should galvanize actions elsewhere, all over the world. So let me quote again that as our managing director said, we must do everything in our power to promote a green recovery. Thank you very much once again.
Well, thank you so very much, Mr. Zhang, for your input. It was very interesting. And as you more or less concluded, humanity and the life we know is at stake if we don't act. And it is obviously not in the minds of all politicians so far, but we are working on it. But now our third expert, I would like to ask Mrs. Susan Gardner from the unit to take the floor, please.
Thank you very much, Doris. Happy birthday. Thank you very much also, colleagues, for this opportunity to speak to you today during this webinar and to be a part of this really very interesting panel so far. It's hard to come after these speakers. I just want to start by reflecting that yesterday I had a really inspiring conversation with Sir Nigel Topping, who many of you know is the UK high-level champion for climate action. And his perspective was especially inspiring because he comes to this position from a career working in the private sector. He has a particular vision on how to harness the power of industry to solve environmental challenges by creating a positive reinforcement loop with industry and governments. And he challenges all of us to think about the fact that how we talk about the future actually shapes it. And that when we lay out a vision for the future, we should choose to talk about hope. We should be hopeful instead of worrying about being right. So I take that as we should be ambitious instead of cautious, and that's what I'll try to do today. In this era of COVID-19, it is easy to be pessimistic about the future, but unless we're hopeful, unless we can get a sense of what's possible, we're not going to win. So I'll just start by saying that COVID has put a real spotlight on the importance of conserving natural habitats, as we've gained a heightened awareness that a healthy planet is critical to our ability to rebound from the pandemic, as well as to prevent future global disease crises. The deterioration of ecosystems and the biodiversity that they contain increases the risk of zoonotic diseases, and we know that. It's information that's available and is as clear as the kind of information that we heard from Dr. Domenici in terms of her really solid studies about air pollution and other effects for COVID. Our continued erosion of wild spaces has brought us into sort of an uncomfortable, close proximity to wild species that harbor diseases, and those diseases can jump to humans. Human activities now affect 75% of the Earth's land surface. Urbanization has more than doubled in the last 3 decades. More than 3 million hectares of tropical forest was lost or destroyed just in 2018. And so nearly 1 million species face extinction. There have been studies from the West Nile virus and from Lyme's disease that have shown that where native biodiversity is high, infectious rates from zoonotic diseases can be lower. But when you have loss of habitat through land conversion, it pushes exotic species off their natural environments, puts them in closer proximity to human populations. Now, COVID-19 provides an opportunity to rebuild a more environmentally responsible world. And just last year, it seems like another world ago, but in 2019, we watched this transition emerge as the world embraced this recognition that investing in nature and nature-based solutions was the most economically sensible and effective approach to creating jobs, to fighting climate change, and to safeguarding health. We observed this global momentum that was fueled by a shared understanding that the true value of nature is not the price of the wood that you can get out of the forest, but it's actually the invaluable services that that ecosystem provides to all of humanity. But there is a danger right now, and we're right at the cusp of decisions by countries could result in relaxing environmental laws as part of a short-term COVID recovery response that could result in long-term environmental damages. The UN Secretary General warned governments should not respond to COVID-19 by making policies and investments that exacerbate existing crises such as air pollution and the climate emergency. So it's very important that we don't lose sight of environmental sustainability in our national response plans. Despite COVID-19, the Sustainable Development Goals and the Paris Agreement are still our best global roadmap for the future. So where do we go from here? I'd like to offer 3 general recommendations. The first is that building back better should enhance transboundary management of ecosystems to reduce habitat fragmentation as part of strategies to prevent future pandemics. These disease transmissions, they're global, they're regional, and they're local challenges, and so solutions will have to be targeted and context specific. Integrated management is critical to include clean air, water, and waste management. These efforts can advance the implementation of multilateral environmental agreements by promoting conservation and sustainable management of ecosystems for human health and well-being. Secondly, transformational change for nature and people requires expanded opportunities for investing in nature as part of the global socio-economic response to COVID. And similar as my colleague from IMS, Mr. Tao, was saying, safeguarding nature requires investing in new financial mechanisms to tackle habitat destruction and other anthropogenic threats. We need investments that recognize the immense value of nature and the ecosystem services that are provided, many of which are extremely undervalued in development plans and national economic plans. For example, imagine how much more food production would cost without the free use of natural pollinators. And finally, raising awareness of the linkages between nature and health is key. We need to reframe the narrative for nature so that its true economic value, including the role in preventing future pandemics, is fully appreciated. Across the globe, public information campaigns about COVID-19 have been essential to reduce misinformation and support really well-organized responses for improving public safety. And as a result, behavioral changes occurred at a pace that no one would have ever thought was possible. But now we see that such major global change is possible. Now more than ever, it's essential that we provide communication campaigns and educational content to ensure that public has access to accurate, science-based information to really understand what is the true impact of their daily decisions and what's the great potential of the collective action that we can all take. And just imagine, with 1.5 billion children out of school right now, governments and educators definitely need new, innovative approaches to learning with really meaningful environmental curriculum embedded. The COVID-19 recovery will provide a monumental opportunity to create a better future, as others have said before me. Circling back now to the advice that Sir Nigel Topping gave to me, I would dare to envision the following future. First, that transformational change for nature and people will be part of a global social economic response to COVID-19. That it will involve every nation, every sector, and the continued mobilization of the public. Increased media focus will lead to stronger public environmental consciousness, and that will drive a new way of thinking. It'll create motivation for behavior change on a global scale. And the public will demand that their leaders take action for a healthier planet, for their own good, for their own safety, for their own health. Finally, that in this vision, new and expanded sources of green finance will serve as positive incentives to prevent backsliding on our past environmental achievements because of the recognition of the interdependency of environmental health and public health. So in conclusion, when we finally find ourselves at the end of this COVID crisis, the other global challenges are still going to be out there for us to solve. If we are genuinely going to build back better, investing in the health of our populations will require investing in the health of our planet. And this is critical if we're going to reduce not just the risk of the next pandemic, but the looming threat of climate change and biodiversity loss. We simply can't afford to fall back asleep now that we've had this major wake-up change. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Madam Gardner. Thank you to all the three speakers for your kind interventions, also for sticking more or less to the time frame that we had in mind. We have already now 11 registered speakers. So the idea is to now go through, to start the debate and building on the comments and on the valuable remarks of our expert speakers. I'm aware that Mr. Chang might need to leave us a little bit earlier. If that is the case, please let us know when that is going to happen, Mr. Chang, so we can just greet you and thank you again for your time and availability. I would have liked to start now. I mean, the list is long. We have 3 more or less minutes per each speaker. I would have liked to start immediately with Mr. Klaus Kindrup from Germany, who we know is an expert, and I will introduce him. But I know that Mr. Congressman Whitehouse Senator Whitehouse is due to leave very soon. So if he's around online, he could make his remarks then, and then we could move to Klaus Kindrup immediately after that.
Thank you so much. I am online. I'm right here. I hope you can hear me.
Bonjour and
buenos dias and dobre dien, and hello to everybody. As parliamentarians, you may wonder what has gone wrong in the United States. So I wanted to take a moment with you this morning to share my frontline view. And it has to do with the politics that we all understand as parliamentarians. The question of unlimited money in politics is at the heart of this, and the ability of industrial interests to spend that money anonymously through front groups is at the heart of this. And the result is that in the US, in Congress, the fossil fuel industry, although it says it supports a carbon price, actually does not, and has its organizations out, organizations that it has funded for years, working very hard to make sure that no significant carbon bill or climate bill gets passed, specifically to include a carbon price. So that's the fossil fuel industry. They say one thing, they do another. Their political armamentarium is very strong. The rest of corporate America has really not yet made climate an issue in Congress. And it's surprising because so many of them have very good climate policies, but there's really no American corporation that has made climate a serious political issue in Congress. Coca-Cola and Pepsi-Cola, for instance, are companies with great climate policies that everybody knows, but they lobby through the American Beverage Association, which doesn't lift a finger on climate, and they fund the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, which brings me to my final point, which is that the great American trade associations, like the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, are pretty co-opted by the fossil fuel industry, and the 2 top trade associations, including the Chamber, have been identified as the 2 worst climate obstructors in America. So what we have, a little bit, if you imagine politics as a sporting contest, you have one side that is flooding the field, very often in fake uniforms, and you have the other side that hasn't bothered to put their uniforms on and hasn't showed up on the field. So the results are, I think, fairly predictable in a country that has allowed corporate power in politics to raise to such a high level. So I mention all of this, A, so you understand the situation in the US, and B, so that you can help bring pressure to bear on the multinational corporations that operate in the US to improve their behavior. And hope very much that this observation is helpful. It comes straight from the front lines. I live this, I see this every day, and I wish you all well in your battle to solve this incredibly vital struggle that we face.
Thank you very much, Senator Whitehouse. Your message came out loud and clear. I will now revert to Mr. Klaus Kindrup, who is actually also an expert guest in this field, someone that Doris already mentioned, our chair. And indeed, he is a part of the Social Democratic Parliamentary Group in the Bundestag and a member of the German Committee on the Environment, responsible, among other things, for climate issues and environmental law. So, Mr. Kindrup, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to give some remarks from Germany, and happy birthday to Doris from Berlin. All the best to you. In Germany last year, we 2 very important laws passed Parliament. One was the climate protection law, that is very important. So now we have strict goals for climate protection, and the CO2 pricing system passed the Parliament too. This is very important for the discussion now in Germany. And now we are discussing an economic recovery program for Germany and for the EU. And for us are 2 things very important. The first is that we want to act in solidarity with our European neighbors. That is very important because some of them were hit harder than we in the pandemic. And the other most important thing is that we want to have a social Green Deal. For us, it's important to have a social Green Deal that's the same as we heard is the just transition we need. And in Germany now, we are in the debate about phasing out coal, and the decision about phasing out coal will be made in the next month. And for us, as a Social Democratic Party, it's very important to invest in the alternatives. And the alternatives are the renewables, photovoltaics, wind onshore, wind offshore. And in a new energy system that is volatile, we need storage. So we want to invest in batteries, and we want to invest in hydrogen. And hydrogen is a very important project in the European Union too. So we want to act with our neighbors in the North Sea for hydrogen and for the transformation of our industry. And as we heard about the air pollution situation, we need clean transportation. So we think in Germany that the electric powertrains are the answer for the future. And we have to transform our car industry, and we will give a lot of public money for charging infrastructure for new cars, and it is very important to act together with the companies and the unions on this field, and we want to cooperate with municipalities too, because municipalities are important for the bottom-up transformation we need. And they are important for climate change, and they are important to fight the pandemic. So we are on the way, and the Social Democratic Party is a front runner in the coalition, not our partner, but we try. Thank you very much.
Thank you very, very much, Mr. Mindrup. It came out very clear, and thank you also for being concise in your remarks. I know you have a lot to say, and you made really an effort. So thank you very much. So now we will proceed with the next speaker. We have so far 12 speakers. We can still keep the speakers list open, I think, for a couple of more names in case there is a need, and then we'll need to close it to be sure that we end on time. So the next speaker now on the list is Ms. Toril Elsheim, our special representative on Arctic issues, also looking at climate change issues from Norway. Ms. Toril, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Marco, and thank you also to our splendid speakers. Very interesting reflections. And dear colleagues, there will most likely be a post-COVID-19, but more unlikely a pandemic-free future. Adjustments are required to conquer both the coronavirus, the air pollution, and climate changes. So most crises also provides opportunities, as we've been told. But this momentum needs to be used correctly. We've experienced falling emission levels during this corona situation. Moving from grasping for air in Delhi 6 months ago to the blissful sight of blue skies and the joy of breathing clean air. Improvement in air quality levels in 85 cities is really promising. So could it trigger policy changes? We experienced a similar situation in 2008, and back then we did not manage to use the momentum that we had. The emissions tripled in the years to come. The climate change is always, the challenge is always to have the right mind at the right place at the right time. And lessons learned should be that the economic recovery from this crisis needs to be green. Renewables, experts says, can create even more jobs given a strong demand for sustainable development. This is promising. The political debates need to be broadened again at this moment. We need the long-term approach to our measures. The OSCE EPA is a unique platform for dialogues amongst its 57 participating states to foster international cooperation on these matters. And as we've heard, the falling emission levels isn't necessarily equal to facing a positive climate effect. It seems like falling emissions doesn't have a positive impact on the global warming in the long run at all. So what does this tell us? The topic of today's meeting are connected and are all essential elements of national and international security agendas. It is to be seen as a threat multiplier, intensifying existing threats to security and increasing environmental stress. So, increased parliamentary engagement are of fatal importance. And states and governments should be encouraged to assume more responsibilities and concrete action with an all of society inclusive approach to migrate the effects of climate changes as well. Being your special representative on the Arctic, I would like to point your attention to our web meeting in September. This is going to be called From the Arctic to the Whole Planet, and the political role in addressing these climate changes. So I hope to see you all there, and thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Tori, for your remarks and also for contributing to a special debate on climate change, actually, at the winter meeting. Last time we managed to meet physically, all of us. We are doing quite well time-wise, so we have still 9 speakers on the list. If there's anyone who wants to register now, I think it's the time to do it, because soon we will close the list. We also have introduced a system, just to remind you, so far you've been all particularly efficient also in keeping to the time limits. We have introduced a little gong system to remind you when you reach the 3rd minute, for your indication. Okay, the next speaker now on my list is Mr. Roger Pandroni Carmona from Andorra. Mr. Carmona, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and thank you for all these technical and specific remarks and explanations. Zoonotic diseases, as we are talking, and the one we are currently suffering, and others that have appeared in the past, show the direct relationship between the protection of our environment and public health, 2 topics that, as we have said, must be a priority in correct public policies. This evidence shows that international cooperation against climate change and the protection of our environment has to be even more determined, constant, and global. Today, the International Day for Biological Diversity by the United Nations, the global community demands to re-examine our relationship with the natural world. The theme elected for this year, Our Solutions Are in Nature, emphasizes on solidarity and the importance of working together at all levels to build a future for life in harmony with nature. Main actions carried out from my country, from Andorra, in order to protect our environment and fight against climate change, for example, are the Paris Agreement that was approved in 2016 unanimously. Also, we have a law for the promotion and transition of energy in climate change, also approved by the Andorran Parliament unanimously. A declaration of the state of climate and ecological emergency, also important, and it was approved unanimously in January 2020. With the active participation of young people from my country. And recently, this last 20th of May, Andorra has become one of the 10 first countries to validate and deliver the text of the national contribution in the fight against climate change to the United Nations. As a result of all this work, nowadays we have a national energy and fight strategy against climate change, with the main objective to achieve carbon neutrality by 2050. And we have a green fund included in the general budget bill. And I think that's interesting because it serves to finance the actions plan for decarbonization towards the goal of carbon neutrality. For example, nowadays also, we are working on a future law on the circular economy. That's why I want to conclude that, first of all, it's not the time to forget everything that has been achieved in terms of climate change and the protection of our environment in recent decades. As you can see, Andorra is already working on projects that promote a more environmentally friendly economy. And it's in the same vein that the young parliamentarians that we participated in the seminar held in Washington, D.C. on February 3 and 4, 2020, we established a joint declaration on future leadership for political inclusion in the OC region. And I want to remember That declaration specified that, first of all, we need to work towards a sustainable energy and circular economies. And secondly, the declaration of climate emergency should be promoted in every OCE participating state in order to reinforce cooperative responses to climate change that empower youth associations and increase youth participation in the public debate. And in reference to young people, as the Fridays for Future movement has been claiming around the world, as well as many other youth associations, greater respect for the environment will offer us a better quality of life, and above all, prevent environmentally and the biodiversity imbalances and new future zoonotic diseases. That's why I want to add that more than 10 years ago, I represented also my country, Andorra, at the Children's Climate Forum organized by UNICEF in parallel with the UN Conference on Climate Change 2009, and it has been a while since that summit. But the message is just as useful today. We have to protect our planet and our environment in order to guarantee the lives of future generations. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Carmona, for your remarks and also for bringing the voice of the youth into this discussion. I will now pass the floor to the next speaker who will intervene in Russian. Therefore, I would encourage all of you to make use of this, in particular, I mean, those who are listening to the English translation, interpretation, to make use of our Interprefy application. So the next speaker is Ms. Tatiana Kuzaiko from the Russian Federation. Ms. Kuzaiko, the floor is yours.
Добрый вечер, Марко. Благодарю вас за возможность принять участие в таком важном вебинаре. И, естественно, все доклады, которые мы прослушали, имеют огромное значение именно для совместных действий по борьбе с коронавирусной инфекцией, которая приобрела именно масштаб пандемии. Россия уделяет климатической проблематике первостепенное значение и является одним из лидеров международного климатического процесса. Необходимо понимать, что именно воздействие климата, экологии имеет огромное значение на общественное здоровье. И вот именно этого вопроса я бы и хотела коснуться. Мир столкнулся с крупнейшим кризисом в области общественного здравоохранения. Конечно, мы не имеем аналогов в современной истории таких моментов. И пандемия ложится тяжелым бременем на системы здравоохранения многих стран. И понимаем, что наилучшим орудием защиты от вспышки любой болезни является сильная система здравоохранения. И поэтому крайне важно именно совместные общие усилия по предотвращению вообще глобальных кризисов во всех сферах, ну и в частности в области здравоохранения. Среди механизмов именно недопущения коллапса в сфере здравоохранения и влияния на общественное здоровье я бы хотела предложить именно совместное оперативное реагирование на такие чрезвычайные ситуации и, конечно же, стратегическую поддержку национальных систем здравоохранения и касательно климатических угроз и экономических угроз, и, конечно, поддержку на уровне региональных механизмов по предотвращению кризиса в области здравоохранения. Нельзя обойти стороной обеспечения устойчивого финансирования для работы по всем темам такого глобального кризиса касательно области здравоохранения, который сказывается на общественном здоровье, и обеспечение приоритетного рассмотрения вопросов кризиса совместно именно в области здравоохранения для того, чтобы национальные системы здравоохранения работали слаженно. Спасибо за внимание и всем успехов.
Thank you very, very much, Madam Kuzaiko, for your remarks, and again, for sticking to the time frame. Yeah, we're all extremely diligent in this regard. The next speaker in my list now is, we go back to English language, is Miss Patricia Bovey from Canada. Patricia, the floor is yours.
I want to thank you all very much. I think the speakers were excellent, and I couldn't agree more about the need for international collaboration. Let me take just a minute to bring you up to speed with where we are in Canada at this point. It's a big issue, and I want to confirm that in the monetary response to COVID-19, as of April 29th, significant monies have been allocated for environmental protection and issues regarding climate. The Prime Minister has also asked 3 of his ministers with environmental expertise to elaborate on a plan for green recovery for Canada. And this will include electrification of transportation, in part building on a Senate study on autonomous vehicles. It will also include lowering of greenhouse gas emissions, of infrastructure projects, and developing resilience in the face of climate change and building refits. I want to thank Susan Gardner for her comments about the preservation of natural habitat, and say that Canada in its last parliament did increase ocean protected areas to 10% of our oceans, and we have 3. We will be moving this forward to 25%, which I find very exciting. The other issue, which we also are very diligent on, are the issues regarding the Arctic and climate change, and I look forward to the September meeting. So may we all work together with this very, very critical challenge facing the world at large. And thank you again for this opportunity.
Thank you very much, Ms. Bovey, for your remarks. I will now give the floor to Mr. Kaka Kuchava from Georgia.
Good evening, everyone. First of all, Doris, happy birthday. Best wishes from Georgia. I would like to thank the speakers for these interesting presentations. I would like to thank the organizers for really organizing this important webinar, and all the participants. And I cannot agree more than that, saying that this is really a turning point. We are discussing the issue which is related to our lives and our future. Topic can be very broad. I'll try to concentrate only on the air pollution issue, which is not the challenge not only for Georgia, but in most of the countries. And some of the recommendations to everyone, which would have been important to fulfill, seemed to be impossible. But because of the COVID, we realized that it's eventually happening, and the result is showing itself. And first of all, the lockdowns and reducing the car driving, it first of all affects air pollution and the air that we breathe. Exactly 1 year ago, I had to give the presentation to the parliamentary session about the findings of the Environment Committee inquiry on air pollution. And it was very interesting to go through these recommendations. But first of all, what was the most important is the participation of the people in this process. This was first time done in Georgian Parliament, when everyone had a chance to be part of the committee inquiry, present their statements, their findings, their researches, their recommendations and suggestions. And we created the huge report about not just the condition of the air quality and the challenges what we face here, but at the same time, the recommendations that were coming from the people. So the involvement of the civil society, not just non-governmental sector or just experts, but regular people who are really bothered about it, really was gathered and presented to the parliament. And we are happy to see a year later, there are many recommendations been already fulfilled. Even today, we voted for changes in the law on air quality. There are more to come. Some of the recommendations have been eventually fulfilled just because of the COVID pandemic and the extraordinary situation we have in the country. But one of the biggest things that we found within this report and the inquiry was the correlation of the air with the health. So we tried to calculate what is the financial effect of not investing into the environment protection and investing only in the health. There is no way out unless we start adequately investing into the environment as well, not just the healthcare systems. So this is something we have to take care of. Sustainable development, everyone is talking about it, especially those countries who are paying more and more attention to the sustainable development goals. What is the sustainability? This is three main points: economics, social, environment. And if any of this will be paid less attention, we will not be able to reach the sustainability. So this is of a vital importance that environmental protection issues, especially after the COVID, that proved is something we can reverse back to, has to take and be care of. Nature takes care of us, so it's now our turn to take care of the nature. But the most important question that stays is how much finances we are ready to allocate when we have so many other challenges, such as poverty, economic growth, and etc. What we are ready to, how much we are ready to finance the environment itself. So once again, thank you for this opportunity, and I hope that these type of webinars or meetings in the future will have some particular plan how we can unite and go forward together, especially sharing the experiences and sharing the not just the recommendations, but the results we will be gaining after implementing these recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kuchava. The next speaker on the list is Mr. Gunnar Bragi Svensson, and after his brief remarks from Iceland, I will briefly give back the floor to Mr. Chan, who has to leave and might want to give a few final words on the basis of what also he has heard. So next speaker, Mr. Svensson from Iceland.
Thank you very much, and Doris, happy birthday from Iceland, of course. Mr. Tao Chang, I have a question for you. You said that we need to invest, I think you said $2.3 trillion each year in green energy or changes. I didn't get it all, in fact, what you said. But in IMF working paper that was published in 2019, May 2019, we can read that subsidies in fossil fuels are estimated or projected to be $5.3 trillion in 2017, or 6.5% of the world GDP. And the largest subsidizers are China, United States, Russia, European Union, and India. So can you agree that we need to reverse these subsidies, at least some fraction of them, to invest in new green technology and renewables? And secondly, has the IMF encouraged its member states to do so, to reduce the subsidies to fossil fuels and investment, and to invest in new energy or something that can change the environment for us? And isn't it difficult to finance the transition to green when the states, member states, for example, of the IMF, are subsidizing the use of fossil fuels? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Svensson. And now I will, as announced, go back to Mr. Chang, our expert from IMF, for some final remarks and also a possibility to answer this last question. Thank you, Mr. Chang.
Thank you. Thank you, Marco. Can you hear me?
Loud and clear, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, and thank you, everybody, colleagues. By listening to your remarks, and I benefit quite a lot, and I heard particularly, the calls by senators, White House, on the multilateral institutions working together with our member countries. And also I heard the questions from our Iceland colleagues, Mr. Gunnar Svensson, on how to deal with the policies undertaken by our member countries, including this, the subsidies issues. So I would like to, first of all, of course, recommit our effort working together with all of you, and all over the world, our member countries, to continue the push or promote the green recoveries, as my remarks early on has highlighted. And this will be, particularly I want to highlight the two important aspects of the work which we are doing. One is we want to continue to incorporate our climate change work into our various tools, such as our assessment of the public investment management and of climate change policies, particularly in the areas of the stress test of the financial systems that we carried out as part of our financial sector assessment programs. And for those countries in particularly the small island economies, we also have this climate change policy assessment, which we jointly work together with our partners at the World Bank. Speaking of the working with our development partners, I want to particularly emphasize that the work has been done together with the coalition of the finance ministers for climate actions and the central banks and supervisors network for greening the financial systems and also the global commissions on adaptations and other standard setting bodies. So the work is done, and so it's ongoing, and we will continue to work on it. And as I said earlier, with our joint effort, we'll tackle those issues which were raised by all the parliamentarians, including these energy policies. So with that, let me conclude my interventions by thanking you once again, Marco and your colleagues inviting me here. And it's a great opportunities for me to learn, and also an opportunity for us to continue the effort on this. And I apologize for leaving earlier due to other commitments. Thank you all once again.
Thank you very, very much, sir. We really learned a lot from your expertise and experience, and I think it was a valid exchange. Thank you for staying with us for an hour and a half, and all the best. We will now go back to our list of speakers. We still have 4 speakers on our list, which puts us in a good position in terms of timing. If there are no other interests to take the floor from the participants, I will now then declare the list closed, and I will proceed with the next speaker in the list, who will speak in Russian language. So again, we should make use of the interpretation tools if needed. Is Mr. Igor Taftin from Belarus. Mr. Taftin, the floor is yours.
Добрый день всем присутствующим. Рад, что стал участником в данном вебинаре и участвовать в обсуждении данной проблемы. Эпидемия COVID-19 планета дает нам сильное на сегодняшний день предупреждение о том, что человечество должно измениться. Здоровье планеты имеет решающее значение для нашей способности оправиться от пандемии COVID-19 и предотвратить будущие зоонозные кризисы. Только за последние 3 десятилетия было обнаружено более 30 новых патогенных микроорганизмов, 75% которых это животного происхождения. В связи с этим нам необходимо более быстрый прогресс в реализации повестки дня на период до 2030 года. Целей в области устойчивого развития и Парижского соглашения об изменении климата, чтобы быть более подготовленным в будущем. COVID-19 дает возможность пересмотреть наши отношения с природой. Правительства должны реагировать на кризис COVID-19, принимая политические и инвестиционные решения, которые учитывали бы также и такие кризисы, как загрязнение воздуха и чрезвычайные климатические ситуации. В настоящее время страны реализуют меры по улучшению окружающей среды при разработке планов выхода из кризиса, вызванного COVID-19. В этой связи необходимо усилить международное сотрудничество, в том числе в области обмена опытом преодоления последствий кризиса и его влияния на экологическую политику государства. Ведь окружающая среда – это один из индикаторов здоровья и благополучия населения. Мы видим, что с одной стороны пандемия отразилась на состояние окружающей среды. Воздух стал чище, оживилось биоразнообразие, улучшилось качество водных ресурсов. С другой стороны, пока мир имеет дело с COVID-19, неблагоприятное воздействие на здоровье человека и планеты усугубляется дополнительными факторами, такими как рост количества опасных отходов, как средства индивидуальной защиты, фармацевтические препараты, миллион литров сточных вод и массовое использование моющих и дезинфицирующих средств и антимикробных средств. Пандемия обнажила многие уязвимые места в нашей экономике и усугубила существующее неравенство, подчеркнув при этом необходимость в устойчивости, инновациях и сотрудничестве. Думаю, что все вместе мы сможем добиться позитивных моментов в улучшении экологии на нашем земном шаре.
Thank you very much, Mr. Taftin, for your remarks. We will now go to the next speaker in my list, which is Mr. Recep Akdak from Turkey. Mr. Akdak, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, dear colleagues. COVID-19 crisis has been affecting all of us in so many ways. In addition to its immediate consequences on human well-being and the global economy, this crisis will probably have long-term effects on the way environmental issues are addressed. I believe that it is a good time to reflect on natural sustainability, which we all depend on for our survival. First of all, this pandemic has shown how critical and fragile our interconnected food system is. It has reminded us more than ever our dependence on nature. This experience should initiate a new way of thinking on food security based on sustainable agricultural production and rural development. On the other hand, the recent restrictions on economic activities and human mobility have significantly contributed to the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions all over the world. However, our experiences from previous crises show that such temporary reductions can be countered by sudden and stronger growth in emissions in the following years. In difficult times, such as during the presence of a pandemic, maintaining improvements and ongoing efforts becomes much more important in combating climate change and ensuring sustainability. In this regard, I believe that renewable energy has a particular role. Turkey actively contributes to this end at several levels. For instance, approximately 48% of Turkey's installed power capacity comes from renewable resources. In 2018, Turkey ranked first in Europe and fourth in the world regarding installed geothermal power capacity. Moreover, Turkey published its first national smart city strategy and action plan in last December. This document is the fourth of its kind in the world. At the international level, Turkey has called out the working group of infrastructure, cities, and local action and UN Habitat in the framework of the UN Climate Action Summit in 2019. Finally, I'd like to emphasize that the need to change our traditional understanding of production and consumption for the post-pandemic period and highlight the importance of a transition to a green, sustainable, and inclusive recovery, as well as a functioning circular economy. We hope that national efforts, supported by international endeavors and better coordination, which are indispensable to contain the pandemic effectively across the globe, would pave the way to build more resilient, equitable, and inclusive societies. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Akdak, for your remarks. We will now go to the next speakers on the list, which is the second last speaker from the floor, and that's Mr. Mark Demesmaeker from Belgium. Mr. Demesmaeker, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you very much. Very nice to see you all, and thank you for the interesting presentations. I would like to focus my intervention on the aspect of biodiversity. After all, today is 22nd of May, it's International Biodiversity Day. This is an initiative of the United Nations. We shouldn't forget that coronavirus is a zoonotic disease that has been passed on from an animal to a human. And it is a destruction and degradation of nature and of ecosystems, as well as wildlife trade, that play a detrimental role in the outbreaks of zoonotic disease. This was already made clear in the UN Environment Programme of 2016 in the chapter on zoonotic diseases there. So I'm convinced that we have to restore good relationship with our nature, and this is of course a global effort. United Nations must play their role, but as always, think global and act local. All starts with our good local policies. And we have to give nature space again, and this starts at home. Each square meter is a piece of the big puzzle in our gardens, at the level of our cities, of that of our regions, the European Union, and beyond. I live in an area in Flanders which is very fragmented. The green areas and the forests are very fragmented, and I can tell you a lot about the projects that are going on here to interlink these green areas again. I don't have the time to go into this, but the thing is, we should not limit these efforts to make these green corridors. We shouldn't limit it to our own borders. When I was an MEP back in 2016, the European Parliament approved my biodiversity report, in which I launched a proposal for a trans-European network for green infrastructure. And the interesting thing is that the European Commission this week presented its new biodiversity strategy for 2030. And this idea for a trans-European network of green infrastructure is incorporated in this new biodiversity strategy. I would encourage all of you to have a look at this new proposal of the European Commission, because this can inspire also other regions in the world. It's very ambitious, and this is my first appeal to the members of the European member states, of course, to make sure that our governments don't water down this ambitions, that they implement, of course, this new strategy. Secondly, we have to look beyond the borders, of course, of the European Union. It is with international collaboration, our devotion on the largest possible scale, that will increase the opportunities we give to nature. To name just one example, the Carpathian Mountain Bridge. It extends further along the EU borders into Ukraine. So if we work together with all regions, from Vancouver to Vladivostok, to make sure that there are cross-border green corridors across our northern hemisphere, this would encourage nature and would give new opportunities. It's more like a romantic idea, you know. The growth of the world population will be a reality. So this will also require investing in innovative techniques. My region, Flanders, has a strong biotech research and development sector. New techniques can play a role in improving sustainability of the food system worldwide, so that more space can be given to nature. And lastly, I would appeal to everybody to make sure that our governments do an effort to tackle and to stop international wildlife trade. This is so important. Wildlife trade has been so detrimental on the emergence of the zoonotic disease. And remember my final words: when we take care of nature, nature takes care of us. If we restore our relationship with nature, nature will not force us into lockdown again. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Demesmaeker, for your very strong appeal. I will now pass the floor to our last speaker on the speaker list, Mr. Tural Ganjaliev from Azerbaijan. Mr. Ganjaliev, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you. I appreciate this opportunity to be a participant and to address this important and very interesting topic and to share some of my views. It's obvious that the importance of environmental protection will be increased in post-pandemic period. Taking into account that the environmental security is one of the most important pillars of the OSCE, and we must deem it very important from now on. Regarding the South Caucasus region, I would like to share some of my concerns. We witnessed massive forest fires in Australia, in California recently, and we have seen the consequences. These ecological disasters affect the daily life of the inhabitants and population living in the vicinity of those places. Usually our region does not suffer from forest or bushfires, but from seismic activity. The South Caucasus is a region which has suffered from earthquakes. Keeping that in mind, Metsamor nuclear power plant in Armenia, which is located in the epicenter of the region of the seismologically active region, makes us all worry. I don't even want to imagine the consequences of the second Chernobyl catastrophe happening in the South Caucasus region. That's why Armenia must close Metsamor nuclear power plant and switch to alternative sources of energy. My other concern is about the environmental situation in the occupied territories of Azerbaijan. Currently, Azerbaijan's Nagorno-Karabakh region and adjacent districts remain under the occupation since 1990s. And unfortunately, during this period, the illegal appropriation of natural resources in the territories have impacted the environment very heavily. Prior to and even during the COVID crisis, these illegal activities in the occupied territories were carried out with intensity and with the direct involvement of Armenia. These illegal environmental activities were already found their confirmation in the numerous resolutions adopted by the UN General Assembly, and the resolutions requested the chairman in office of the OSCE to provide a report on this matter to states, members of the General Assembly. I would also like to recall the resolution 2085 adopted by the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe about the Azerbaijani inhabitants residing in the frontier regions, in the line of contact areas being deliberately deprived of water by Armenia. Having said that, I consider that the peaceful resolution of the conflict and the coexistence of Armenian and Azerbaijani population in the Nagorno-Karabakh region of Azerbaijan will improve the overall situation regarding the environmental security of the wider region. Cessation of military occupation and the peaceful coexistence will give an impetus for the whole population living in the region to be engaged more actively in the issues related to the better environmental protection. Last but not least, I want to underline one simple point. What we learned and still learning from this COVID crisis is that humanity comes before everything. We all are humans and we share a single home, Earth. Instead of trying to damage one another, humans must cooperate for peaceful coexistence in an ecologically clean world, including environmentally secure future of the Caucasus of our region and the better OSCE region. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ganjaliev, for your remarks. With this, we've closed the list of speakers. Before, though, going back to our expert guests and also to give the floor to our rapporteur for some final remarks, I would like to give the floor back to our chair of the second committee, Ms. Doris Barnett, for some remarks, questions, and also if the president also wants to add, I know normally he's keen to ask also a question to our speakers in case he also could do that now. Mr. Doris, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much. We heard a very interesting discussion, and environment, climate change are topics for years, if not decades now, but there are no deeds whatsoever. We have a lot of talking, but little doing. And we all agree that something has to be done. And the COVID-19 gives us a pause to think what we are going to do. And there are countries who are able to do something, but they might not because they see other places where they can earn money. But we need to make clear to them that even with clean energy, you can earn a lot of money and have a lot of working spaces. And thank you, Senator Whitehouse, that you gave us such a good insight. But we have countries that are not able also, because of money, they cannot afford to do that. So we need to have more cooperation. And actually, at the end, my if I may say so. The Homo sapiens might become a virus to nature, but at least nature knows how to be a little bit more careful what we are doing to nature in order to keep us all on a well planet and live a good life. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, for this very, very, very important words. Just quickly before we go back to our keynote speakers, Mr. President, I think you're still online. I can see you. Would you like to add your few thoughts?
I'm still online, and thank you, Marco. First of all, being a very good chair and a good facilitator, and I think we had a really interesting discussions. The problem is multifaceted. We all understand that. And now thinking what it will be after this COVID and how world will emerge after that and what lessons we will learn, that's the most important thing. Today we touched upon many issues. It was air pollution, and we very clearly understood how the small particles are dangerous, which could increase, of course, mortality rates and different diseases. And when it comes to biodiversity, it was very good that it coincided with this day. We also very well know, it's well known that all those human, let's say, invasions and violations of biodiversity and ecosystems, they lead to very, very deep and grave complications. Of course, the pandemics are also part of that. And that's very important. That was mentioned several times that we need investments. And I fully agree, this green recovery should be the priority. And it was mentioned also here. There are different recoveries, with economic recovery, democratic recovery, and of course the green recovery. What will be this green recovery? How governments will prioritize that, putting special measures, investments, and stimulus packages, and these economic plans that they are discussing now. And we well know there are different calculations that $1 spent in nature restoration, for instance, at least $9 of economic benefits to expect. So there are many questions. There are also evidence-based facts, and I think this cooperation that we have with this webinar, and particularly pleased to say that we had different countries, different regions, also we're never missing our American and Canadian friends, and a special thanks to Senator Whitehouse for his very interesting remarks and underlining that multilateral organizations are very important. So I think that I found this discussion very interesting. And when we are quoting different resolutions, we should also bear in mind always that our assembly had a history, and a quite interesting and positive history of pushing those issues in many of our resolutions, maybe even from the last resolution in Luxembourg, we can see how parliamentarians will see a key to push this agenda on environment, climate change, and strengthen this cooperation. So if there will be something, a question time, that would be, again, very general to our speakers, how they see what parliamentarians and politicians can do better in this process. So thank you very much again, and thanks to everybody, to the chairmanship, and this committee, and the leadership, and our secretary, and our speakers again. I hope to see you soon in different webinars. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, for your final thoughts and question. I would now ask Ms. Susan Gardner to reflect over what she heard, and if she has any final words to tell us. And then I will ask also, of course, Dr. Francesca Dominici to do the same. And finally, we will conclude with the words of our rapporteur. So Susan, the floor is yours. Thank you very much for staying with us all the time. And we look forward to hearing you.
Thank you, my pleasure. It was an extraordinary conversation, and it's hard to decide what specific things to comment on. So I would just try to reflect on the President's question in terms of what parliamentarians can do by first thanking Andorra and Belgium for remembering to celebrate Biodiversity Day. I was very pleased to see that brought forward. And all of you can also celebrate Biodiversity Day with hashtag Biodiversity Day. I invite you to do that, or check out the UNEP website, especially our colleagues in North America, where there's still time to see all of the various events that are going to be happening throughout the day. So that's the first thing you can do right from your desktop. We've heard in the conversations a real call for global ambition on climate change and environmental sustainability more broadly. And I think we have some really great examples that were brought forward in terms of the EU Green Deal. That's a phenomenal roadmap for success and implementing that, drawing out the concrete steps that can be taken to ensure that that ambition comes forward despite the recent crisis. It was great to hear about the Canadian plan for green recovery. That's going to be the kind of examples that we need to be looking for, in addition to ensuring that whatever we do is consistent with the Paris Agreement and the SDGs. If we're staying on the 2030 agenda, then we know we're staying on the right track. We heard a lot of emphasis about an inclusive approach, about engaging municipalities, and also, as the President referenced, Senator Whitehouse's comments about U.S. engagement in industry. It was, there's great opportunities to engage at all these levels, and it's a matter of ensuring that we're crafting the narrative to help resonate with the understanding of the individuals that we're trying to motivate. It's a hard thing to do, but it's essential. Industry came forward at the beginning of this year with really ambitious commitments. We saw that with Microsoft and their $1 billion commitment to invest in offsets and to go carbon neutral in the next decades. That's phenomenal. And now what we have to do is make sure to remind our industry partners that they are and have been committed to this, and make sure to keep them moving forward. That's the kind of positive reinforcement loops that my colleague from the UK, Sir Nigel Topping, was talking about, so that we remind governments what industry is already doing, we remind industry what governments are planning to do, and we keep everybody in a positive feedback loop. I also want to thank Turkey for bringing up the example about food systems vulnerability. It's so key. We will not succeed to address the climate crisis or the biodiversity crisis unless we fundamentally change our food systems. And we have to do it in a way that's inclusive, that is helping to alleviate poverty, that is helping with rural development. And overall, any of these approaches, it has to be founded in the concept that you can invest in nature for food production, for better, more efficient, safer, healthier food production. Investing in nature for people is the only thing that's going to resonate right now as everyone tries to figure out how to recover from this crisis. The last two things I'd like to say was just to respond to Belgium's comment about wildlife trade. It's essential that trade in wildlife is well managed. CITES lays out the roadmap for that and is very clear. Illegal wildlife trade is the fourth largest source of trafficking, but CITES does lay out ways for sustainable wildlife trade to occur in a way that helps ensure that local communities are involved and that local communities are motivated to conserve the wildlife in their backyard in ways that promote sustainable growth for the community and overall sustainable management and protection of the species. The final thing I'd like to say is there was a reference about the 2016 Frontiers report that UNEP produced that referenced the connection between zoonotic diseases and health. We are currently working on an update to that, which will be a special edition focused specifically on zoonotic diseases and health. We will begin to launch the initial stages of that at World Environment Day in early June. So please stay tuned, and that information will be coming available from there. And then I just want to conclude with, I heard a couple of different things about nature takes care of us, so we take care of nature, or there was another one earlier about don't mess with nature. And so I just want to conclude with what Amina Mohammed, our UN Deputy Secretary General, said during the Climate Action Summit, which she said, "We picked a fight with nature, and nature is fighting back. So watch out." Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to share these remarks.
Thank you very, very much, Ms. Susan Gardner, for your remarks. And of course, I don't want to take credit that we don't own. When we chose the 22nd of May as the date for this event, we didn't really realize that it was the International Day of Biodiversity. But I think it makes it, even more a sign of destiny that certain things needs to be, addressed, and that today we're discussing about this. And I'm sure that 2020 will be somehow remembered as the year the world slowed down to some extent, or at least in certain terms. So this is already an important factor to keep in mind, and then we'll see if it will really be a turning point for environmental protection. Having said that, I would now like to give the floor to Dr. Francesca Dominici, for her final remarks of a couple of minutes, please, so that we also have time to listen to our rapporteur.
Yes, thank you. I'll be very brief. I think I wanted to underscore the comments of Susan Gardner, especially for the positive reinforcement loop. I think that actually crisis is a time for optimism. I hope that yet we are going to transition also to have an infectious optimism, and in addition of an infectious virus. And I think the infection optimism could really bring humility and working together across all around the world, because we are fighting the same enemy. So I think that this is not really only an action plan, although I really enjoy learning about the action plan. I think there is a commitment. This is a moment of ethical reckoning, and the commitment is really to transition away from fossil fuel burning to green energy. It will solve two problems. One, immediately, we will be breathing cleaner air. And second of all, we will combating climate change. And so I was so pleased to hear that everybody was so on the same page on this. And second of all, I hope that the infection optimism also will create an infection about a commitment toward public health, because public health is about prevention. And so the way the air that we breathe, the water that we drink, the food that we eat will make us stronger. And instead of treating disease, I think this is really a time where transitioning from fossil fuel to green energy will increase public health all around the world, will make us stronger, will make us healthy, and we will make us stronger to fight additional pandemics that we know will come our way. So thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. It has been a unique experience, and I learned a lot from all of you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Dominici. I mean, it came through, we were reading articles, and we found, as you mentioned, some of these articles about your research, and that's how we came to know about your work. But I think you managed to really prove and show us the body of evidence that hints to this incredibly important and worrisome correlation between, of course, pollution and our health, and in particular with COVID-19. So thank you for your remarks. I'm now very pleased to give the floor to the rapporteur of the OSCPA Committee on Economic Affairs, Science, Technology and Environment, Ms. Elona Gabrea-Hoca from Albania, for her concluding words. Elona, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you, Marco. Thank you very much for making this webinar quite interesting to you, to the staff. Of course, thank you, the President, and also our dear Chair. Happy birthday, Doris, as well. And Artur, my colleagues, and which we are working quite hard. I would like to also commend a high-level expert guest for their informative and thought-provoking presentations, which I'm certain will influence our future efforts in this important domain. As said by many, the current crisis has also shown this current economic model, and quite unexpectedly provided us with opportunity to recalibrate our development policies. While many are lobbying for things to go back to normal, we must ensure that we do not return to a normal that is not socially and environmentally sustainable. The pandemic has reminded us once more of the severe health implications brought by inadequate environment protections. As explained by dear Domenici, a lot of studies has conducted over the years and has established this negative impact of air pollution on public health. I am aerobiologist by profession, and also allergies combined with air pollution aggravate the situation. I just wanted to make this remark. According to the European Environment Agency, PM 2.5 concentration in 2015 also has been responsible for about 422,000 premature deaths originating from long-term exposure in Europe. I do apologize that we don't have much more updated data, but also this showing all this impact that air pollution do have on health and on us. In the specific context of the pandemic, there is also the growing evidence that long-term exposure to the fine particulate matter is also associated, which was said, with increased risk of COVID-19 related deaths to the United States. Similar studies also have been shown and conducted in Europe as we speak. Notably, the Italian Society for Environment Medicine recently has found traces of the new coronavirus on particulate matter in several areas in northern Italy, constantly with evidence already available for other viruses, through signaling that the air pollutions can also enhance the persistence of the virus in the atmosphere. We encourage also, I think, as a parliamentarian, to also have more research on this field and to use this good opportunity that we have today for much more future webinars such as this today. While further research is clearly needed, such studies as also should serve us as a wake-up call to us as the legislators, to our governments, to the public, to place the protections of the environment at the center of our policy and development trajectories. As argued by our high-level guests, we must fully commit to promote green recovery policies if we wish to build a resilient world. Several priorities should also consider direct public support towards green projects, prioritize investment in green technologies, clean transport, sustainable agriculture, climate resilience, low carbon transitions in the energy sector, to promote green finance, to promote the use of the green bonds and other forms of sustainable finance, to establish also a higher carbon price to encourage climate smart investments and accelerate the shift to cleaner fuels and more energy efficiency. In the face of soaring unemployment rates and the closure of many businesses, it's important that we acknowledge the benefits of a green recovery, which represents to us in much more terms of job creations as in terms of building long-term sustainable development and enhancing our world's resilience against another top priority in our agenda, the climate crisis. Against this backdrop, our role as policymakers and the role of our national parliaments is more important than ever. Let us not forget that parliamentarians not only hold the power of legislations, but of oversight as well. It is therefore up to us to make sure that our laws and policies are promoting growth and not at the expense of the environment public health, but rather in the support of environment and public health. Therefore, I encourage all the parliamentarians to promote good models in this field. Dear colleagues, it is very inspiring to exchange views with you on how we should use the crisis momentum to operate a shift towards more environmentally and socially sound policies. Hopefully, today's expert presentations and lively debate will inform the elaboration of our national recovery plans. I would like really to thank by heart also the guest speakers with their lively presentations. I would like also to finish by emphasizing that no recovery, even more so green recovery, can be achieved without strong international cooperation aiming at advancing sustainable development and security across the OSCE region and beyond. As a rapporteur of the General Committee on Economic Affairs, Science, Technology and Environment, I'll ensure that all of these recommendations are duly reflected in our next OCPA resolutions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very, very much, Madam Rapporteur, and thanks again to all our guest speakers for their excellent contribution and to all our members for their constructive engagement. I hope you found this web dialogue interesting and inspiring for your future work, for our future work. I now declare the meeting closed a few minutes after 5. So we were successful more or less in meeting the time frame, which is always a good news. And I would like to wish you a good evening from Vienna. The meeting is closed. Bye-bye. Thank you very much.
Ciao, ciao, guys.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.
And have a nice weekend.
Bye, everybody.
Have a nice birthday today.